Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to today's episode of the podcast. Super excited to have you join me, and I want to jump right on into it today as usual. So I got this idea for the show a while back after, working with my clients as long as I have and, helping them to find a way to seek out emotional support and just also have fun. So a lot of times when you're in abusive relationships, you don't know how to have fun, or you don't know how to make friendships, or you may be mistrustful of making friendships with people if you've had pretty harmful, abusive, or toxic experiences with people where it's just been this exchange and you have not fared well when the dust has settled. And so if you have a difficult time making friendships, I have a guest today that's going to, give some tips on how to make friendships. And she comes from a securely attached background. And she and I also discuss how attachment and abuse history may impact friendships. And so that was kind of a co-discussion there, if you will, in terms of talking about that. And so without further ado, here is my interview with Danielle. She is a friendship coach, but here she is without further ado. Hello and welcome to the show, Danielle. How are you?
I'm okay. Thank you so much for having me.
I am super excited to chat with you and glad that we could work it out this morning. I know it's been kind of a busy morning for us both.
Yeah, but you know what? Whenever it comes to talking about friendship and the importance of friendship, I'm here for it. So I'm glad we were able to find some time to really dig in.
Amen. I'm glad about that too. So, for my listeners who may not know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and the passion behind your work?
Sure. My name is Danielle Bayard Jackson. I'm a female friendship coach and educator. So I'm actually a former high school teacher. Then I became an academic chair. And then I left the classroom to get into public relations. And in all of those arenas, I heard people struggling with their friendships. So I was mostly at the time teaching juniors and seniors in the classroom. And I was seeing the girls who came to me between classes or after school, and they're talking about complicated relationships with other girls. And then when I
Mm.
got into public relations, I'm dealing with high achieving business owners, and they're also secretly confessing to me their issues when it comes to, friendships. They're killing it in business, but don't really have strong friendships. And so I kind of had this moment of like, wait a second, at every stage of adulthood, but really womanhood, we're trying to figure out how do we navigate relationships with other women. And so that's when I kind of really leaned into, I already had my education background, but then got, certified to coach as well. And so for the past 4 to 5 years, I've been serving in this role. And what that means is I'm able to help women when they're trying to figure out how to form friendships, navigate conflicts, or release friendships with grace.
I love that. And is it, just to clarify, is it women and men that are coming to you for friendship issues, or just mainly women that are coming to you for
That's a
friendship?
great question. When I started, it was first kind of like co-ed friendship. But as I continued to study the research, because I like to go straight to these, the research journals and interview the researchers, I started to see a lot of differences in how men relate to men and women relate to women. And at the end of the day, we all want the same things from friendship, but we
Mm,
prioritize those desires in a different way. So, for example, with emotional support, we all want our friends to support us emotionally. But for women, it's the number one thing we seek in our same sex relationships. So, when I was doing all this research, I thought, you know what? I really want to lean into women's friendships, but I do get emails from men, maybe one email a week from a guy who's like, I know you work with women, but can you help me with this? And I have
yeah.
taken on some men. I just let them know I specialize in women's relationships, but sure, about 70% of the content is transferable to any kind of friendship.
Okay, so can you tell me maybe the top 3 or 4 concerns that people have when it comes to friendships?
Yeah, if I had to break, well, some of them are kind of like intrapersonal and
Uh,
just things that we're dealing with ourselves that make friendship hard, and others are more external between you and the friend. So internally, sometimes it's, I have a struggle creating time for friendships. I don't have time for that, is one lie that we often tell ourselves. And I know everyone's situation is different, so I don't want to minimize anybody's situation, but
sure.
the biggest thing for some people is I don't have time. That's an internal conflict we struggle with to make time.
Mm,
Um, some mentalities that I've noticed that are blocking are, I'm scared that if I get close to other people, then they'll see all my stuff. I'll be exposed for the fraud that I am in some ways. They'll see how messy I am. They'll see that I'm kind of awkward. And it's like, yes, they will. You know,
wow.
so some of like the internal stuff that makes building friendships tricky. Um, and then, when it comes to friend, I see friendship issues of, I feel like I initiate more than my friends is a common one. I give more than my friends give. I'm pursuing this more than they are.
Mm,
Or specifically, women will come to me with seeking support for having a hard conversation with a woman that you love. How do I tell her she's too clingy? How do I tell her she's too critical? How do I tell her that she demands too much? How do I tell her that I
mm,
want less? How do I tell her that, because of our diverging beliefs on a certain issue, I don't think I can share space with her anymore? How do I bring
mm.
up these things other than just ghosting this person, which I know not to be productive in, or maybe I can't escape this person because they're in my neighborhood. And so a lot of those kinds of things are things that I see getting in the way of having healthy, productive friendships.
Okay, so I wanna kinda go back for a second because as you know, I work with women, and men, that are recovering from abusive relationships or have a history of being in relationships that are abusive and toxic. And in my line of work, I oftentimes see themes that mirror each element of relationship, the toxicity or the abusiveness or the boundaries. And I think one of the first things that maybe would be helpful for you to do, since friendship is your jam, is maybe define what a friendship is, because I think that's such a small word, but I think people use it too broadly, or they may consider people friends when they don't necessarily need to, or if they haven't done enough vetting to make sure this person is indeed a friend. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I hear different philosophers and psychologists. We all define friendship differently. So I'll tell you what definition I'm working with.
Sure.
And that is, I always say three facets of what I think would be healthy to include when defining a friend. One, you know each other. I know that sounds obvious, but you know each other. There's reciprocity and there's affection. And I say that because, especially with women, sometimes we are driven by the chemistry we feel. A
Mhm.
lot of us are familiar with the concept of fast friends, and we're like, oh my God, I feel like I've known her forever. And I think that feeling might be a great catalyst to launch into a friendship. It is
Mm,
not a friendship because there's no time that has passed for me to test her character. And not that we should be putting our friends through a test, but we haven't had enough experiences to reveal her character, her commitment, our compatibility. I haven't seen enough yet. though I feel like we're connecting because we have the same sense of humor and like I disclosed to her, she disclosed to me, oh my gosh, this girl's amazing. That's really great. And that's really great that you have this new person in your life, this new acquaintance or this new girl you're cool with, that all these other descriptors. But to say this is my friend, that means somebody who knows you because enough time has passed. They feel the same way. It's reciprocal. Is it something where you're constantly
Mm,
pursuing them? You're trying to, you're hoping that they'll change. You think you can rescue them. You think you can, and they're not showing the same energy. And then finally, affection. We like each other because a lot of us are
mm,
calling each other friend, but I'm using that term with somebody who I feel like I've outgrown or I don't really like her, but I feel like this relationship will be advantageous to me in some kind of way, but I call her my friend. So someone who we have
mm,
a fondness for each other, it's reciprocal, and we've learned about each other over time. So that's the definition I tend to work with because your feelings are fleeting. And if we have a chemistry today, oh, I'm your friend. But then if we have a little argument tomorrow, are we not friends anymore? So there's something dangerous about rooting that definition in and how we feel, and it's just a lot of things to consider. But does it feel good to you? Is it good for you? Because those sometimes aren't the same thing. Do we know each other and do we have the best intentions for the other person?
mm. And it's interesting. I like that. I have some thoughts about time too, which I want to circle back
Mm.
to. But, when people are in an intimate relationship or intimate partnership, they'll oftentimes have conversations about, hey, where this relationship is going and how we sort of define each other in this relationship. Should people be doing the same thing with friendships?
It's so interesting, right? I wish there was a format and like those same, mile markers that we tend to get
Yeah.
romantic relationships. Like, hey, what are we? Are we exclusive? How is this going? And I think we can definitely pull from some of those same practices with our friends. Now, there
Mhm.
might be ways I think to do it that maybe don't feel formal or really heavy. But if you ever do find yourself needing clarification for something, go with that feeling. If you're ever confused and you're like, I want to talk to this person to make sure we're on the same page, I think to go with that feeling is always a good thing. Get clarification, make sure y'all are on the same page. But if you're nervous that asking somebody what are we as friends could feel a little intense, there are subtle ways to do it. So for example, sometimes if I'm talking to a new person and I'm really enjoying her, I'll say to her like, okay, you know what? I like you. It's playful, but I'm letting her know I have an interest in getting to know you better. And sometimes even saying that, like, okay, I feel like we have a lot in common. Would you want to, grab coffee and talk more about XYZ? So there's a way to display, interest. But typically I know in friendship, we tend to try to signal our interest by the things we do and don't do. So if I'm not
Yeah,
interested, I don't answer her texts.
right.
Hopefully she'll figure it out, or if I am interested, then I'm blowing up her phone and constantly asking to hang out, so we try to show through other cues because it does feel so foreign to sit down and be like, okay, what are we doing? But I think that there are subtle ways to kind of deduct the same idea, if whether or not the friendship's mutual. But sometimes we can tell through other actions and inactions. And at the end of the day, though, if you're ever confused and you want to know that you guys are on the same page, then always go with the intuition to ask.
I like that. And do you feel like there's some common misconceptions that people get around a friend, like that that someone actually is their friend? Like, for example, are there maybe some red flags that this person is not your friend? This is more of a toxic relationship that you've sort of aligned yourself with, or you've called a person a friend when you shouldn't have.
Yeah, so I'll tell you this. I was actually talking to a colleague about this morning.
Mm,
I like to say that typically the content that I give and the insight I share, I'm always quick to clarify I'm a coach. So I'm always going to focus on, where are you now? What's the goal? What are we going to do to get there? But
Yeah.
sure, I'm increasingly seeing how much of our background plays a role in where we are right now and
Mm,
how we are perceiving the experience unfolding right now. So maybe if you and I are in a friendship, maybe I'm having a certain experience because of how my background has colored, connection and healthy conflict and all that good stuff. So I am careful to speak to what I can speak to, but I will
sure.
say, but I love that you're asking that because I do understand that some of us use the term loosely, or we pursue certain friends and we're like calling them friends. And I want everybody to get comfortable with one, taking your time and getting curious to just explore and experiment first.
Yeah.
There doesn't have to be pressure to be like, wait, are we friends or not? Does she like me back or not? Does she, if we have a good conversation, can I find a way to just be like satisfied that that was like a really nice moment? And if I do find myself curious for more, I'm going to put myself out there. There's a chance she might, reject me, but I'm still going to put myself out there and try. Like, how can we continue to kind of keep ourselves at like a balanced, healthy, I'm gonna put up myself out there and try. But if they reject me, it's not a reflection on who I am or what my worth is. It just didn't work out. I'll try again with the next person. Maybe this will work out. So how can we just kind of stay like centered and balanced? But if we do find ourselves getting in a
Mhm.
friendship and it is toxic, I will say this, and I know this is not popular, it's not popular messaging, and I'd be curious to hear what you have to say. But
Okay.
I'm currently writing my book. It's called Fighting for Our Friendships, and I've been
Nice.
interviewing tons of people. And this week I've been interviewing a lot of people who really specialize in like gaslighting and
Yeah.
narcissism and all these extreme behaviors. And as we talk through all of that, the conversations always end with them saying, but at the end of the day, you have to do a self inventory. Why are we
Yes.
consistently attracting these people? Why are we
Hmm.
pursuing these relationships? Why do we stay in them? And then they always go back to, but what is our role? And that's not to say, and I'm sure you speak to this, that's not to say that you are bringing on your own harm and destruction.
Yes. Yeah.
However, at what point do you look back on your friendship history and say, oh, people are awful, or they can't be trusted, or they can't be, really? That's true of every single person you've interacted with. At some point, we have to say, okay, what's going on with me that I am too scared to set boundaries because I'm scared that I'll take them off and they'll abandon me. Like why do I
Hmm.
not feel assured in myself that I can, erect a boundary in a gentle but firm way. And that if they leave, well, that's okay because I need to put up boundaries for my own self preservation,
Mm.
And so instead of like they continue to push me, they continue to, at what point am I like, okay, I can't be here anymore because it's not good for me. And so, when it comes to like registering toxicity and these friendships that are harmful to us, we really have to do a self inventory of, wait a second, what do I think I'm deserving of? And do I choose to continue to participate with this person who is showing no good intentions for me?
I like that. I like that. But what I will say, in my opinion, is that's a simplified view.
Okay.
It's a simplified view, in my opinion, because a lot of times, and this is, in the work that I do with clients that are specifically recovering from things like abuse or narcissistic abuse or things like that. And I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the show, is that a lot of times people are in recovery from those relationships in multiple areas,
Mm,
if that makes sense. So you might have a parent or parents, siblings, um, your workplace, your intimate partnerships, and your friendships. So there could be so many levels of just all of these things impacting you at once because it becomes a norm. It's all you know, if
mm,
that makes sense.
yeah.
And so, when looking at a friendship, it's not just a linear, hey, I have some toxic friends and I'm sort of drawing these people in. It's like, this is my way that I might have been conditioned to be in these types of relationships from very early on from childhood. And that's all that I have surrounding me.
Right. And this is where I say I know the limitations of my experience,
Yeah.
how,
Yeah.
but one thing I'd be curious about is I think that's why it's such a wonderful thing that there are
Yes.
people like you who exist to help us get out of a pattern
Right.
of connecting with people who are harmful and they don't have good intentions for us. Or that's why I think it's so important, because what it's so interesting, I'm on social media pretty heavily, and I really enjoy being there and interacting with people. But it's so interesting because sometimes I'll even see in the comments that if I, were to post a video that I think is relatively reasonable. I mean, if it's
Yeah.
something like suggesting like, hey, if a friend does something or fails to show up for you in a certain way, before saying, oh, I'm going to cut her off, or oh, I'm going to try to earn back her affection, why not say like, hey, this is what happened yesterday. Like, am I experiencing that wrong? Like, what's going on? But then you'll have people in the comments, instead of saying like, oh, that's true, giving the friend a benefit of the doubt, or maybe
Yeah.
asking her to clarify. It's, well, I'm not going to do that with someone if they're horrible, not supportive. And it's just like so extreme, the
Yes.
response. And so I do like to
Yes.
say that I like to, most of my content, especially since I'm not, a psychologist or therapist, is going to kind of come from a place of a securely
Absolutely.
attached, reasonable person. And then I always encourage that if you're noticing that all of your friendships are always harmful, and there's this like, there's constant drama, and they're gaslighting you and making you feel like your reality is not your reality,
Yeah.
and you feel like you have to earn their affection, that it's really helpful to seek out support so that you can kind of
Absolutely.
address that and then be better equipped to pursue healthy, better functioning relationships.
Absolutely. And I can appreciate you coming from that place too, because, and that's why I asked like some of the simpler questions, because,
Mhm.
on this podcast, if you have people that listen that were never taught how to form healthy connections, right? Or
Yeah.
that wasn't something that was modeled for them,
Hmm.
or, something extreme happened to them, kind of like COVID, where we all had to pretty
Mm.
much hide out for 2 years, or there was some condition. And that's why it's so refreshing having someone like you that, hey, it's a no-brainer for me. Like, I can do this, and this is what I know, and this is how I help people. But yeah, and that's why I say it's awesome having your perspective as well.
Yeah, and I just think I think it's great that, I mean, that there are even people who are actively listening to this podcast because they want to have better
Yes.
insights. They're trying to get to a more securely attached space. They're
Yes.
trying to better understand why they might operate the way they do. I think it's so important, and I think we all have the responsibility of doing that really difficult inner work to figure some stuff out so that we can
Absolutely.
enjoy really like rich, meaningful platonic relationships.
Absolutely. And, even if you haven't been in an abusive relationship, sometimes I do wonder if there are unfair expectations put on your friends, right? As
Mm,
opposed to your intimate partners or maybe even family members, like, people, and this is another reason why I said maybe we should start having discussions about what we are and what that consists of. It's because people have these ideas. Each
yeah.
person is different in terms of what their expectations are from friends, for friends. And so, you might have this expectation that your girlfriends show up for you in every single
Mhm.
way and be there for you and nurture you, because the person that you're with can't, right? Or they just
Yes.
get it, or they're there for you to kind of emotionally dump on when you're having
Mhm.
a terrible time.
All of those things. Yes. I'll tell you, that's one of the things I like to ask about toward the beginning of a session, to give me a baseline of, okay, if this is what you expect from friendship, of course that's going to dictate your experience with these other women. So I like to just come from a place of curiosity. Tell me about what friendship is to you, or what do you feel like your friends should do? And
Mm,
it's interesting because even when they share it, it's almost like they're looking at you like, well, duh, like I have to articulate this. But a lot of times we've never been asked, we've never been tasked with articulate what you expect from friendship, because we
mm,
assume that the expectation is shared by the people we engage with, and it feels like it's killing the vibe to have to say it out loud. And I think a lot of these stereotypes of female friendship, especially these stereotypes of this person who just gets me and our connection is unspoken, there's a problem with that. I
Mm,
think it's also one of those things where sometimes our strengths become our weaknesses. So in the book
mm,
that I'm writing, I'm seeing a lot of research that does support that women are very in tune with emotions. There's even some research that suggests that women can see anger on another woman's face where a man can't, but a woman can see it, which is very fascinating. So all that shows like we are in tune with reading micro expressions and sensing something's wrong with someone, which I think makes is such a superpower. However, I think it works to our detriment if we expect that we shouldn't have to communicate out of our mouth because
mhm,
surely she can pick up what I'm feeling. Surely she knows exactly the kind of form of support I need or that I needed support at all. And so some expectations I see that set us up for disappointment. One, my friend should be my therapist. I do say having friends and talking to them is definitely therapeutic. But I've noticed that if we're continually tasking our friends with helping me regulate my emotions, help me process, this crazy toxic thing that just happened, and that's what I see your role for my life. I just simply say, can we consider the experience of the person on the other side? If in this friendship dynamic, my job, my sole job is to help her cope and to process and regulate, at some point, can we just when do we get to enjoy each other? When do I get to share with her? Sometimes when I want to share things too, and I want company and processing. So expecting that the role of my friends is people to share my trauma with, to help me through at all times, is just one of the things they're able to help us with, but it's not their sole responsibility. But that expectation, I get a lot of women who come to me because they're overwhelmed or burdened by, God, I just feel like, sometimes I just want to break every time we get together. I'm hearing it. I'm stressed. I'm struggling with it. And
mhm,
secondhand trauma is real. So that's one expectation I see sets us up for disappointment. There's one lady I was working with, and she was so frustrated, and she's like, I can't find any good girlfriends. And I said, well, what are good girlfriends to you? And she was like, well, people who just like listen, like people who just like help me through like all these problems that I'm having. And I just thought,
mhm.
and it just was so telling. It was so telling. So that's one. Another one is I shouldn't have to say it. They should just know. There's this popular
Mind reading.
sociolinguist. Yeah, and there's this popular sociolinguist. Her name is Deborah Tannen, and she calls it the birthday present effect. And the example
Mm,
that how she describes it is, you know, when it's your birthday, there might be a certain present that you have in mind that you want, but you don't want to have to say it, because if you say it, then it's like you're stating the obvious, and you almost want them to be able to buy that exact present for you because you take it as evidence of your connection and rapport. The fact that you didn't have to say it and
mm,
they just knew, that's my evidence that you get me, you see me, you connect. But is that totally fair? Like, but the problem with that is you risk not getting what you need. And so
mm,
we have to kind of separate this. Well, my friends should just kind of like get it, and charging them with violations that they didn't even know they were doing, because we don't want to say, hey, actually, I feel best supported when you do this, or I think I really need this right now, or and being able to say it out of our mouths. Maybe my somebody I love passed away, and yeah, you text me and said, hey, do you need anything, and you dropped off food, but I really need you to come sit with me for a little bit while I cry it out, or I really wanted you to check up multiple times, or I needed you to come and distract me and take me out and not just, send me a card. And so we assume. And so I like to ask, if your friend was equipped with all the information, might she have chosen differently if we gave her access to all that I'm thinking and feeling back here behind the scenes?
yeah.
And then the final false expectation is that my friends will solve everything and they'll be everything to me. And I
Mm,
always like to say, truth be told, you're not everything to all your friends either. Maybe I'm your going out friend. Maybe I'm your venting friend, but
yes.
I don't share lots of interest to you. And so sometimes being disappointed or disenchanted when we realize she's not everything. She falls short in these ways. And she probably will. And that's why it's really nice to have a large, varied support network.
Absolutely, great, and I think that kind of goes back to defining friendships, but also not discarding people necessarily because of limitations or recognizing that there can be different levels to interactions that you have with people. Like you said, sometimes there are people that you might just go shopping with, or you might go out for dinner with on Friday after work. And, and that might be all that it ever is. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person or that that's someone that you shouldn't engage with, but maybe just accepting it for what it is.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I like, with the emotional dumping, I'm wondering, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. But when I talk to people about that, I always tell them to ask before you sort of engage in this stuff, whether it's your intimate relationship or, your stressful day at work. Ask if it's okay to sort of dump on anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that because I'm showing that, hey, I have this need right now, but I also simultaneously hold respect for your capacity right now too. And I know some people are not a fan of that. Again, I saw a video that went viral about that on TikTok. A girl was like,
Really?
I just asked my friends, and of course you see in the comments women like, oh my God, if we're friends, I'm not gonna sit here and formally ask you, check yes or no. And I understand that sentiment. Like we like the idea of ease, of this unspoken natural, I can just show up and she gets it. I don't have to explain or beyond. I totally get that. I think we all kind of want that feeling. But I think it dismisses the fact that friendship is not just a recreational refuge, it is also a responsibility. It is
Yes.
both of those things. So I
Yes.
love that I can come to my girls and show up and just let it all out. But then I also need to respect that sometimes you're going to need me in that way too. Or sometimes I'm going to be inconvenienced by your needs today because I
Yeah.
had some plans, but now you're feeling some kind of way and you brought me down today with all that you got going on. But I accept that responsibility. And I also trust that things will balance themselves. So perhaps in
Absolutely.
this season, I am showing up because you're going through a divorce and it is so hard. And I trust that I'll get that same support back. There's research that suggests that in the beginning stages of a friendship, we tend to be kind of tit for tat because we're
Mhm.
we're kind of testing reciprocity. You know what, girl, you got my brunch last time, so I got our tickets for the event. Like, so we're keeping track. But hopefully, as the friendship matures, you're no longer taking account of every little. Okay, she bought my coffee, or I bought her coffee, but she didn't pay me back because we trust that over time it's all going to work out. I trust that maybe this month has been really hard and it's been a lot of me dumping on you because I got so much going on and I'm a mess right now. But you trust that next month it's going to be your month and I'm happy to show up for you too. I trust that it's going to come back around and that we share that for each other in different seasons. So yeah.
Let me ask you this, if I may. You had mentioned people sort of seeing themes of like drawing in toxic people. We were talking about that.
Hmm.
And, oftentimes when it comes to intimate relationships or even maybe even close familial relationships, there could be some advice around sort of taking a break and working on yourself before you enter
Hmm.
into a relationship. What do you think about that as far as that goes for friendship?
Oh, I love that idea. One thing I would suggest is I know sometimes we'll pull away from friends because we're like, you know what, I really need some time to work on myself. And what I appreciate about that is I'm signaling to my friend, hey, I'm about to pull away because I need to figure out some things. And I love the communicative part of that, and I love the self-awareness in that. I would also add to that to make sure you don't isolate yourself because I think there's a difference. There's just too much research that points
Mm-hmm.
to the power of social support. I mean, literally,
Mm-hmm.
there's stuff out here talking about how women, physical support or how it impacts you physically to have social support, how it helps
Mm-hmm.
you in postpartum. I mean, there's a study I read that they followed women who had just given birth, and they found that they were more likely to avoid falling into anxiety and depression if they had the support of their friends, not their spouse, not their family, their friends. So I know sometimes we almost think
Yeah.
we're protecting other
Yes.
people, and
Yes.
and sometimes we're doing it out of a really noble place. hey, I don't want to get my stuff on you, so I'm going to go sit over here. And I appreciate that. But sometimes you do need the support of your community. You can figure out what that looks like, but finding a balance between what's me pulling away to kind of really be able to focus on myself, but not isolating myself, because believe it or not, social support is a part of
I love that.
our healing. So whether that looks like, hey, maybe I'm going to pull out of this intense friendship, but I'm going to plug into a support group where these people maybe aren't my friends, but I still need social support. I still need other people. I still need community. So in that place of I'm going to separate, I would say maybe I understand dialing back, or maybe saying like, hey, I've become so ingrained and entrenched in this relationship, I think I need a timeout. I think all that's great. But I wonder if the timeout means social isolation, because we still need
Mm,
people to help us through.
I like that. I like that you said that, the isolation piece too. Another common thing that I see that people have that will oftentimes come up in friendships is that history or time, as I mentioned earlier, in that people may have known someone or grown up with someone
Mm,
for a long time, and they're starting to feel like, hey, we don't really connect, we don't really vibe anymore, but I feel obligated to stay in this thing because, or this relationship, because we've known each other for so long, and I would just feel terrible just sort of stepping out or stepping away from this relationship. What are your thoughts about that?
yeah. So it's hard because, even our friends from way back, they anchor us. That history that we share, it keeps me connected to who I was and where I come from. And so I understand how it serves a purpose in holding on. But if we get to a place where we feel like, man, it's draining my resources, and resources by mental or emotional resources. Either I don't have enough time to keep this up, or emotionally I feel like it's draining me, or whatever it is. And I feel like this friendship is, I'm not going to say not serving me, because I don't necessarily like that language, but it is depleting me in some way. Um, I know, especially for women, we hold on because we think we have so much shared history, or we think, man, she's been so loyal to me. How could I do this to her? Like, she's been there for me. I don't want to, unbalance the scales by withdrawing my friendship. A lot of us see a part of our character as being a good friend. I'm a good friend. And so we view withdrawal from the friendship as a contradiction to that characterization. If I leave her, am I no longer a good friend, a good person? And having to figure out how those two aren't necessarily exclusive, mutually exclusive. Me remaining in the friendship makes me a good, thoughtful, loyal person. I can still be that, but also see that like maybe I shouldn't be maintaining this anymore. And so, I would just say take a look at um, how the relationship adds value, because I know that looks different from person to person. Does
Yes.
it add value? This person can still be a good person. In fact, I've heard a lot of people use that as a reason to stay. Well, I mean, she's a good person,
Yes.
and that should be the baseline. I would hope so. So that's the baseline, her being a good person.
Yeah.
Let's look at the rest of the stuff, because I can't just be friends with people because they're good people. Are we compatible? Do I have enough time in my life to even nurture this? I know some women who, maybe there wasn't necessarily a falling out in the friendship, but they find that they're no longer really interested in this person's life developments, and keeping up with what they've got going on takes energy to pretend they're even kind of interested anymore. So now they
Mhm.
dread the phone calls, and they kind of have anxiety when it comes to hanging out, because they're wishing they were doing something else with their time. And all that stuff is going to manifest itself in some way, anxiety maybe, or resentment, or maybe I'm making little passive aggressive remarks because I don't want to be
Mm.
there. And she deserves to be in company with people who are happy to be in her company. So I think sometimes we see it as, well, I don't want to be mean to her by letting her go, but doesn't she deserve friends who are excited to hang out, who are eager to hear about her life updates? And so, yeah, it might be an awkward conversation. Yeah, there will be, it might be hurtful and awkward and hard. But if it redirects her towards people who are eager to have her company, and it releases you from any kind of burden you feel with that relationship, then in the long term, it would be the right thing to do for both people.
Okay. I like that. For people that have maybe experienced a significant betrayal in their friendships, any thoughts about how people can work to sort of recover, or whether or not they should decide to, what their decision process should be around, should we recover? Should I let this go? Does it work for me? Does it serve me to be in this anymore?
Yeah, you know, when it, I'm doing a lot of research currently on apologies. And one
Mm,
part sometimes of the healing process is a person who says, I apologize, especially if we're considering remaining in the relationship. That would be
yes.
100% key. Not necessarily this person betrayed me and I'm moving on and I need them to apologize for me to have closure, because we know we might not get that. But if I'm considering staying, personally, I think a big part of me being able to stay and move beyond the transgression is you looking in the eyes and saying, I apologize. Not, I'm sorry, but I only did that because. Not, I'm sorry that's how you feel, but man, I apologize. The last thing I wanted to do was hurt you. I really messed up. And moving forward, I can tell you, I will never do that again. That's what would be necessary for us to remain in relationship with one another. If I feel like there was some kind of crazy, or just major, I should say major betrayal that transpired, but we still want to salvage our relationship, is a self-awareness, a person saying, reassuring me they do not want to hurt me, and then maintaining the promise of, I will never do that again. And me seeing over time, is this person going to do that again? Because to some extent, we are going to hurt each other, intentionally or unintentionally. The difference maker is a person who really doesn't want to. And they're going to
Mm,
prove to you over time that they do not want to, because they want to protect your heart. They don't want to ever be the source of your pain. You know,
yeah.
that's what we're looking for when it comes to reconciling after a betrayal, and a person who proves it to you. Because I know some people, they do give you the, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And they do it again. I need to see in your actions over time that that's something you're dedicated to correcting about yourself, so that we can be in relationship with one another. And if you don't, okay, I'm not going to vilify you and say you're a bad person, but this is not good for me. That behavior that you consistently default
Mm,
to doesn't work for me. It's not
absolutely.
congruent with what I value. It doesn't allow me to preserve myself, so I can't stay here.
I love that. I love how you broke it down, and so people can start to evaluate those things. If someone has trouble with, like you said, accepting that, people are going to hurt you. We're all human. It actually happens quite naturally, either intentionally or unintentionally, right? But there are some people that, again, if you've been through some complex trauma or some relationship trauma, you're quick to cut people off after they make a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Any
Mm-hmm.
suggestions for people that are cut off, that are quick to cut people off, in terms of friendship?
Yeah, it's funny because my whenever I talk about friendship, my main talking point, I'm always talking about reconciliation, forgiveness, talk through it, and then there's someone quick to remind me, I mean, unless they screw you over, because I'm not gonna sit here and let people just screw me over, so there's always somebody who wants to make it known, I will not tolerate. And I think to some extent, sure, I'm not gonna sit here and let people walk on me. I'm not gonna be duped. I'm not gonna be manipulated. Yes.
Mhm,
But I would say first start with looking at how is uh how is what you've been doing so far serving you, would be the
mm,
first question I would ask a person who's quick to cut people off. How has that been working for you? What is your margin for mistakes?
mm,
What how much space do you want to give for a person who said they'd call you back and then they didn't? Or
mm,
who made a joke when you guys were all out and the joke felt like it was kind of at your expense? Like, is she trying to, kind of get a dig in? How much did I first address it? So, how much did I say, okay, am I being sensitive or what's going on? I feel like you said something in front of everybody and made me feel some kind of way. What's my willingness to engage first to make sure we have an understanding? Or do I make up my mind to determine that was harmful? I'm not going to subject myself to harm because I'm going to protect myself. So I'm out. So how much margin do you give people to make mistakes would be the first one. The second question is, how often do you make mistakes? Because I've noticed that the more you're able to say, like, yeah, sometimes I drop the ball, I've noticed those people be a little more forgiving when they can recognize the ways that their humanity causes them to drop the ball sometimes too. Um, and then also to see that if you are quick to leave because you want to protect yourself, that means you're also depriving yourself of the depth that comes with being in relationship with another person and talking and going through things and supporting each other. So while you might be quote unquote protecting yourself by leaving before they can do you any harm, will you ever be able to experience platonic intimacy where
Mm-hmm.
we sometimes hurt each other, but then we apologize, and then we get through hard things with the support of this person, and then we make a mistake again, and we work through it, and will you ever experience what that feels like if you run at the sign of any perceived harm?
I like that. I love that a lot. And I totally agree with you there in terms of the intimacy factor. So, is there any tips or advice that you have for people that, again, have trouble with connections, intimate connections, for making, well, first of all, finding and making friendships?
Mm. Yeah, the first is to be very cautious and exploratory from the very beginning. If we're entering into relationships where we've seen this person be disrespectful of others, unwilling to apologize in other areas of their life, being manipulative, if you're observing those behaviors of the person right when you're getting involved with them, it's something to kind of keep in your back pocket, or I think it's something to be aware of, because some of us are trying to go the distance with someone who's clearly demonstrated disrespect, manipulation, gaslighting, and maybe not with us, but we sat and watched them do it with their parents, their
Yes.
siblings, their coworkers. So at some point, let me observe before, again, I loosely consider this person a friend. So we talked about kind of carefully observing before I throw that term and invite them into my life in a special way. Um, the second thing is, I think, to sometimes, to the extent you think it's helpful with the person who's not manipulative, is to communicate, like, yeah, well, sometimes my tendency is to cut people off, but I just wanted to ask you what yesterday was about, because I don't because I really like you, and I want us to be friends, and I just want to make sure I understood everything the right way. Sometimes I call it telegraphing your dilemma, because sometimes there's so much pressure, and well, what do I say? How do I respond to this? What tactic am I going to use? And sometimes saying, like, okay, here's my dilemma. I've had people kind of let me down before, but I know this is the first time you and I are having kind of like a weird thing. And so I want to try something different. And I just want to ask you first, like, what did you mean by that? Or, whatever it is, sometimes telegraphing, because I think some people step up to the plate when they have that information. They're like, I don't want to be that person in your life. Or, wow, that gives me context as to, why you sometimes
Yeah.
talk like this or do this. That gave me helpful conflict, and giving them a chance to have data about you. So that's why you have to give boundaries and sometimes share what you're thinking and struggling with, because they can download that as data in order to use to love you well, not use to manipulate you or to weaponize it against you. But with the right people, they want to know your boundaries, because they're like, oh, good, now I know, not to do this thing because it doesn't make you comfortable, and you just gave me like the guidelines of how you feel best loved. Thank you for giving me that information. Now I know not to bring up that word because it triggers you. Now I know not to do that thing because it makes you not feel seen or heard. Oh, I'm so glad you told me that. And so, when it comes to like making friends and trying to explore intimacy, make sure we look at the things that we can observe early on, not just with us, but with other people. Make sure that we understand the difference between healthy and unhealthy conflict. Conflict is inevitable. And the closer you get to another person, the more weaknesses you discover or things you discover that you don't like, because we're getting closer to each other. So now I can see clearer. Ooh, that. So that's why sometimes that distance feels safe and it feels like everything's like hunky dory. But the closer I get, of course I'm going to discover things I don't really like. So that's going to happen. And the closer we get, of course I'm going to probably unintentionally hurt your feelings because I feel comfortable. So I'm saying something popping off and you're like, okay, let's bring that back, so that's going to happen. But if I know the difference between healthy and unhealthy conflict, that will help me have platonic intimacy, because platonic intimacy often lives on the other side of navigating healthy conflict. So conflict means, we have differing boundaries, needs. And so, of course, when we come together, there's going to be a clash. We're two different people with our stuff. So it's kind of clashing. It's not congruent. But let's talk through it, work through it, because we want to be in relationship with one another. So anything that's like coming back together, that's healthy conflict. Anything that's giving us an opportunity to solve a problem, that's a healthy conflict.
I love
But
that.
anything that's like a power struggle, or they're giving me the silent treatment to punish me, is that conducive to us coming back together? No, it's keeping disconnection. Anybody who's yelling at me, that's creating disconnection. Anybody who's gaslighting me and saying like, I know they clearly called me a certain word or they did a manipulative thing. When I tell them, they're like, no, I didn't. That's disconnection. We're not on the same page about what just happened. You're making this
Hmm.
up. So like, ask yourself, when we're in a tense moment or conflict, is this person working to bring connect back and restore connection, or is it disconnecting? Threats, blame, lying, anything that makes me disconnect and not bring us together. But anything that's like, oh, I see what you're saying. I don't agree with you, but I hear what you're saying. Okay, let's talk about that. Or hey, I didn't mean to do that. Let's talk about that. Or hey, I disagree with what you got going on, but can we talk through it? That's okay, healthy. That's healthy. And on the other side of that is that platonic intimacy, comfort, delight, where we get to show up as our authentic selves without fear of punishment or abandonment.
I love that. I love that so much. And I thank you so much for breaking all of that down. So we are almost at the end. Can you believe it?
I know. There's so much that can be discussed, and let me tell you this. I so appreciate the conversation because, like I said earlier, I do tend to present content from a securely attached
Yes.
space, but I do recognize that there are women listening who want healthy friendships, but they're also bringing such a history that sometimes makes it difficult for them to really enjoy healthy and productive friendships. And so, I'm learning a lot, even just having this conversation with you about, how not everybody has the same background experiences, and how despite how hungry they are for these healthy friendships, there's a lot that they have to almost reprogramming the algorithm, as one of my
Yes.
colleagues, Dr. Franco, she's a friendship expert, and that's how she describes it. And I love that imagery. She says it's almost like we each have these different
Yes.
algorithms that we're moving through life with, and we realize, wait a second, I think I have to tweak mine a little bit. And so this is really
Absolutely.
teaching me so I can be more empathetic to the different situations that women are bringing to the table as they continue to intentionally pursue platonic relationships with other women.
And I agree. And one quick question that I'm going to throw out there to you, and this, if this is outside of your scope, you please let me know. But as you're talking about women and having trouble and connections, how have you noticed any themes between women and their mothers?
Yeah, so I just interviewed someone about that relationship because I don't have that background, and she illuminated me on a couple things. I can't really go into too deeply, but I think would be helpful to just like throw out there. One, she explained to me that, often the way that we connect with other women in adulthood or adolescence is a reflection of how we connected with our very first female friend, which typically was a woman caregiver. So whether it was your
Hmm.
mom or the person taking care of you, how did you connect with her? Did she show up for you? Did she love you without strings attached? Did she minimize your feelings? What did that look like? And how did that maybe unknowingly train you to anticipate harm, criticism, rejection from other women. I notice that some women really lean into, women friendships, and others are like, I can't stand other women. That's why I am friends with guys, because I can't stand other women. So
Mm-hmm.
who is the first female source of your harm, connection, safety? So she was able to kind of illuminate me on a lot of that. And then also how we had to were able to get love from our mothers. Is that the same strategy we use with female friends? So the example that one expert gave me is, if you had a mom who only gave you attention when you pleased her, then are you now a people pleaser with other women in your life, trying to
Mm.
constantly earn their affection when you really, hopefully, in a healthy friendship, you don't have to. I like you because of who you are, but do you find yourself constantly giving presents to other women, constantly being complimentary? Or if she's asking your opinion on this dress that she's wearing, it's like, oh my God, you look amazing. You are so great. You're so wonderful, because that's what you had to do with your mother to get her to approve.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting to see how that relationship impacts the way that you show up or don't show up with other women in adulthood.
I love that. Thank you so much. And Danielle, can you tell people how to connect with you if they want to connect with you more after this podcast? If there's anything that you're working on that we can support you with.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Most everything lives at betterfemalefriendships.com, and that walks you through, there's coaching sessions. I have a podcast called the Friend Forward Podcast, and we
Love it.
recently launched like a book club and a community where women can come and talk all things female friendship with each other, and know that it's in a space where we're trying to talk about healthy friendships. So, you just described your listener as somebody who's, had these certain background experiences. And if they're trying to get in a space where they're trying to figure out the norms of healthy friendship and trying to figure out what that looks like, it might be helpful to join a community. Right now it's $5 just to be in there and talk with other women, and just to kind of be with other women who are like, who can help you set those norms of what healthy friendship might look like, and to see that we're all trying to get it right. It's not just you. We're all
Mm-hmm.
out here trying to figure it out. So it might just be helpful to be in a validating space. But yeah, everything lives at betterfemalefriendships.com. And I'm so glad for the opportunity to come on and to engage in this really important conversation with you.
I am so excited that you came, and I thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for this great interview. I think a lot of people, it's going to be very helpful and it's going to resonate with a lot of people, all of the things that you had to say.
That's the hope. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, so you heard my interview with Danielle. Would love to know what your thoughts were about the show. So please leave a comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube. If you are following us on social media, which the links are in the show notes, leave a comment there on social media as well. And until next time, you guys take care of yourselves and be well. Check out the sneak preview of next week's episode.
Yeah, I didn't know there was anything wrong until 2 months into the marriage. On the last night of a delayed honeymoon, someone sent me an email in the middle of the night. I got it at 4 a.m. in the morning. When I woke up, I saw that there was a message that came in, and this woman emailed me via Facebook and said, "So you're married to so-and-so." Well, I guess the joke's not just on me, but it's on you too. I've been dating him for the past 3 months. And my world was destroyed. I had this shock that I had this as I realized that there was a world of what I thought was true, and then there was this revelation of what she was sharing of a reality that I had no idea of, and it felt like two snow globes coming together and colliding, and my world shattered.